Tamatha Paul.
Speaker. Well, welcome to an era of mass incarceration which has been brought in by Minister McKee and their misguided, unimaginative approach to dealing with the very real harm that is happening in our communities. Let's be straight up about what we've got in front of us. We've got a concept of 3 strikes that we have imported from the United States of all countries, the country with the most incarcerated people in the world. That is the country that our government has chosen as an exemplar for our justice system. And where did they get that idea from? They got it from a game of baseball.
Of baseball. What she does ignore, though, is regardless of what we have or have not imported, New Zealand's prison system is not the same as the US. We do not have the same system. Especially, you can't even look at the systems and compare them across an entire nation because they differ state to state. There's a difference between state prisons, state laws, and federal prisons and federal laws. So there is far too much variation and difference across the US as it is to really make that claim. But additionally, US prisons just fundamentally set up differently than New Zealand prisons. We have very particular sets of issues and very particular ways of approaching them, especially within our prisons, that the US may or may not. They may have alternatives. There may be some very, very effective US prisons out there. Tamatha wouldn't have checked if there is. I'm not going to bother, because that's not the point. But New Zealand's prison system in particular works in a particular way, and is actually quite suited to the 3 strikes concept if she had any understanding of why it was actually useful.
A game of baseball where 3 strikes and you're out. But this is not a game. And if the government actually put some effort into basing their law and order policies on evidence rather than a game where there are winners and losers, then maybe our communities would get the safety and the peaceful way of life that they deserve.
I like how she says winners and losers. There are really no winners and losers in crime. There are just losers. So there's the losers who are the victims, and then there are the losers who are the people who are now being put in prison because they are losers, right? So there is no winners and losers. The Crown is forced to incarcerate you because you've done a bad thing. And now what the Crown provides in order to either help you rehabilitate or just leave you there to rot, that's up for discussion. But the idea that there is winners and losers with the 3 strikes thing just because you want to make a weird baseball analogy, that's nonsense. But something I do like about the Green Party, and they do this a lot, I like it because it's good to laugh at them, is this whole evidence thing. Their criticisms consist of the following. You have done this is bad, the evidence disagrees with you. What that evidence is, we're not going to substantiate, and anything that we do try and provide in an attempt to substantiate it will actually be nonsense. And we want to watch you squirm as you attempt to debunk the idea that restorative justice is superior to putting someone in prison where they belong. No, restorative justice is not going to help a serial killer. Okay? Restorative justice is not going to do anything to stop a repeat offender offending again. And that is the number one thing that the Green Party, the People Against Prisons Aotearoa crowd, like to cite. Restorative justice. The evidence says it works. The evidence says it might work for like a very, very particular set of crimes, and that it might somewhat reduce crime in conjunction with other things, by the way, which don't exclude incarceration if I'm not mistaken. But I engaged in restorative justice. It did absolutely nothing for me. The restorative justice thing was an embarrassing situation. It wasn't a very comfortable one. It was even worse because everyone around me was my family. That made it even worse. Restorative justice has its place. It is useful in the rehabilitative process, but it is not something that you can use on its own. It's not something that you can just say, okay, it's either incarceration or restorative justice. Just as there's no real, it's either rehabilitation or punitive action. That's not how it works.
But we're playing games of people's lives, And it's not just the people that we're sentencing that suffer, it's their entire families and often their communities too.
That's their fault, not the government's fault, not the people sentencing them. It's not the judge's fault, it's not the jury's fault, it's not the victim's fault. It's the fault of the offender. And if the offender has a negative impact on their family member, that's, again, their fault, not anyone else's.
Because children of people in prison are 9 times more likely to go to prison. And now,
And if you wanted to be honest about why that is because the majority of people that go to prison have gang connections and these children are growing up in gang households. It doesn't really take much processing power to figure that one out. The majority of people who go to prison, if you've been to prison and you meet people in prison, you will know the majority of them are gang members. The majority of them have been in gangs because their family got them into it, and that it's been a trend within their family for a very, very long time. You just have to walk into a prison, you'll figure that one out real quick. 5 minutes maybe. Quick conversation with a couple of people. Done. Boom, you're out. Except she doesn't do that. She allows the prisoners to manipulate her into spewing the nonsense she is right now.
thanks to the new young serious offenders category, they can go into prison even earlier.
Good.
And that's the approach.
And actually to that, good. Because prison does them a lot more good than youth justice facilities. I'll tell you that from experience. Youth justice facilities are not fit for purpose. They do nothing. They do absolutely nothing to reduce recidivism. The sooner that these repeat offenders who are doing, 6 months at a time for really, really heinous crimes, the sooner they go to prison, the sooner it is they'll get a wake-up call and realize they need to really sort their shit out and change what they're doing.
Of this government to law and order. It's a game of how many prisons can we build and how many beds can we fill with poor, disabled, brown people before the public rejects this failed logic that locking people up and punishing people does not lead to the safe communities that the public deserves.
Identifying people who are antisocial, committing crimes and endangering the public, and removing them from the public in the hopes that maybe we'll be providing them the resources to change, that does not do anything to create a safer public. In fact, that does the opposite. Great logic. Are you going to talk about how there's no such thing as rehabilitation in prisons next? So I'd love to get onto that one.
And at the rate that we're heading, we are going to need a new prison every few years.
Good.
The $1 billion, and it's shameful, it's unimaginative, it's a waste of money when the government could be putting that money into housing, into education, into job opportunities, livable benefits, the public health system. But no, let's build more mega prisons. Because that is the sum ambition of this government. They've scrapped prison population reduction targets. They've removed...
You should not ever have prison population reduction targets, under any circumstances. You saw what happened under Labour. A 30% decrease in the prison population and an approximately 30% increase in crime victimizations in that same period. Who would have thunk it?
Treaty provisions from the corrections bill, they have made it easier to lock up children with the young serious offender category because that is their ambition and they think...
I tell you what, if you had met the average young offender, you would not have an issue with this at all. Okay, I myself was shocked by how these people thought. I was shocked by how honestly fallen these young people are. I knew a 14-year-old who had just been incarcerated, locked up, put in a youth justice facility. One of the first things I ever recall seeing him doing was sitting behind a couch pretending he's smoking a fake pea pipe, which speaks to the larger issues about why youth offending is a big issue. But he did that, and then he was an inherently violent individual who engaged in a lot of it. These people talked about violence and committing crimes like you would a video game, like you would that whatever thing that you're currently interested in. They talked about it like it was nothing, like it was their entire life. Nothing mattered more than the next crime. It was cool to outdo one another. Oh yeah, I did this many crimes, I did this crime there. Oh, have you ever hit that place up? Oh, how many cars have you done? How many high speeds? What was your longest high speed? How fast did you go? Did you ever crash? I met a guy who robbed a bakery, and while his mate took the money, he took all the bloody donuts and stuff. We called him pork rolls because he was a fatty. But yeah, that's beside the point.
That they can just lock people up and that's going to solve the issue. Well, it won't, because it's a failure. Just like 3 strikes was a failure. And the concept of continuing to repeat failed experiments is the definition of insanity.
It's not really. Let's be honest. Everyone overuses that. But actually, to speak on the whole it failed thing, it's actually impossible to claim that 3 strikes failed in New Zealand because we did not let it be in place long enough to actually conclude that fairly. So, for example, about the time that it was repealed, we're at the stage where those who had been on a 2nd strike were approaching the kind of end of their sentence about the time that they would be released. So we needed to extend it by probably another 5 to 10 years to get a true grasp of whether or not it was effective or not. Which leaves us really with only one thing to assess its accuracy. Anecdotes. And so I'm going to give you my anecdote. I talked to someone on a 3rd strike, and I talked to several people on 2nd strikes, and they were very much in favour of repealing the 3 strikes law. Can you guess why? Can you guess? Because they did not want to be subject to a 3rd strike. They did not want to have to do an entire 14-year sentence without parole for an aggravated robbery. They did not want to have to spend the rest of their life in prison if they committed a murder. They didn't want to. That's the reality. This discussion was going on around the same time that the Labour increased the ability for people to vote in prisons, right? And so you had a bunch of people who had, let's say prospects and other people within the gang who were in for far lesser offences, who were now provided the opportunity to vote whilst in prison. And the general narrative within the prison was to, okay guys, you're going to vote for Labour because we're going to ensure that we get our way. We're going to ensure that you guys can keep coming in and out without such severe consequences. And I mean, you couple that with the 30% reduction in the prison population and all that other stuff, it's understandable why our crime got really out of control for a couple of years there.
3 strikes was a failed experiment. It's a policy that has, according to advisors, limited evidence that it reduces serious crime. Officials weren't even able to identify any quantifiable benefits for this bill, and that's because there are none. There are no benefits from reintroducing 3 strikes. The evidence also shows that judicial discretion is better than mandatory sentences because it allows for the circumstances of each person to be taken into account. And that matters when you look at who's actually in prison. More than 90% of people in prison have a lifetime diagnosable mental health or substance abuse issue.
And the majority of them will not get a discount for it at all because most people who go out and commit crimes of something of that nature. We're talking about people with dyslexia being counted in those statistics. We're talking about people with ADHD. People that have relatively mainstream issues with themselves. We're talking about people who might have depression. And unless you get a true discount for mental health related factors and a core element of your rehabilitation is focused, or almost entirely focused, on your mental health, then that's just nonsense. Okay? That's just nonsense. I'm not going to be sitting here and accepting the whole dyslexic counts as having an issue, ADHD counts as having an issue. I know so many people with ADHD. They're not repeat offenders. No one commits a crime because they have ADHD. Okay?
More than 75% of people in prison have been victims of violence. I know the government loves to talk about victims of violence. How about that? That a majority of people in prisons are victims themselves. It's a false dichotomy to make it out like there's a difference. They are victims.
See that guy there? He's been attacked before. He's been assaulted before. He's been victimized by someone before. Therefore, we can't send him to prison. That's not fair. That's not very nice. How dare we? It's honestly the most stupid, pathetic argument I've ever seen in my life. Let's have these people who have been victimized at some point in their life not go to prison so that they can victimize more people, because apparently repeating the cycle is better than punishing those who are causing the cycle to persist. See, none of the issues she's pointing out are the fault of prisons existing. None. Now, she could make the argument that how our prisons currently set up are not doing enough to reduce reoffending rates. Fair. Although I think far more blame's put on the actual prison system itself than is deserving, but that at least would have some basis in fact because our reoffending rates are terrible, so something's going wrong. But what she can't do is say that putting people in prison because they're victims is a bad thing. Putting people in prison who have committed crimes and victimized people because they were once victims themselves is a bad thing. That's ridiculous.
Too. And around 71% of people in prison have significant literacy issues, and 1 in 3 people who have been in state residential care between 1950 and 1999 end up serving a prison sentence.
I do just want to say, it was actually really, really good. Like, that was probably the biggest upside to prison, was being someone significantly more educated than the average person there. And that's saying something because I was a high school dropout. It made you feel very, very intelligent, which wasn't good for your ego. Fortunately, it meant that you're kind of a rare species in some ways. And so that came with its own perks. So occasionally downsides, but it came with its own perks, especially when you're giving veiled insults and they have no idea that they're being insulted. That was a good one. It meant that you could express your frustration with this very, very frustrating individual without getting punched in the face. Now, sometimes you push a little bit too far and you get punched in the face anyway, but whatever.
Prisons should never be the only answer, yet they have become the only answer because that is the sum ambition of this government and of the minister.
You see, the thing is, that's just not true, though. It's never been the only answer, and it's not the only answer right now. Right now, we use a range of different alternatives, and frankly, those alternatives are failing. They're not working. The very people who push for the approach to prisons that Tamatha here are pushing are the same people that are to blame for the likes of Irina Zarutska in the US being murdered on a train. Because we're letting them out because they're victims. We're letting them out because they have dyslexia. We're letting them out because they're not intelligent. We're letting them out because they might have some form of mental illness. And then they let a refugee, a Ukrainian refugee, bleed out on a train saying, I got that white girl. Because people like Tamatha Paul decided that they're victims, we can't incarcerate them. Let's put them out on bail despite the fact that they've committed crimes on 14 occasions. Or been arrested on 14 occasions for goodness knows how many crimes. What she's advocating for does not work, never has worked.
They choose to ignore the strong evidence about the failure of 3 strikes. They continue to restore failed policies, and until they wake up and realise it doesn't work, we will get no better outcomes in this country.
The strong evidence that 3 strikes doesn't work. Last I checked, no evidence is not strong evidence. And the only reason there's no evidence is because Labour conveniently got rid of it before the evidence could be gathered. So, Tamatha, what you've done here is proved that you should spend less time writing speeches about things you do not understand and more time seeking the insights of people such as, I don't know, maybe me, maybe someone like me, because they'll prevent you from making a complete fool of yourself in Parliament.